More at 9:30 on Sunday.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Good afternoon, it is 2 p.m. That means it's time for Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, online and digital radio. Now, we've got a big show for you today. It's over 3 weeks since Nicola Bulley mysteriously disappeared. Lancashire Police have, of course, come under intense criticism, not least in the way they've communicated sensitive information. I'll be getting the views of 2 experts on that and whether the public are right to be losing trust in the police force. Also, are we really being outgunned by the French? Believe it or not, they're reportedly getting more bang for their buck when it comes to their military spending. And the number of people arriving in this country by small boat is already 86% higher than it was this time last year. I'll be getting the views of my political panel on that one. All of that to come. But first, let's get the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good afternoon. It's just past 2 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has urged world leaders to double down on military support for Ukraine, and the West's response to Russian aggression hasn't been strong enough. Addressing the Munich Security Conference, Rishi Sunak said the UK will be the first country to provide longer-range weapons to Ukraine, and he encouraged allies to provide the most advanced air defence systems. He told Western leaders NATO standard capabilities are needed to counter the Kremlin's attack, and Moscow must be held accountable for crimes against humanity.
What's at stake in this war is even greater than the security and sovereignty of one nation. It's about the security and sovereignty of every nation. Because Russia's invasion, its abhorrent war crimes and irresponsible nuclear rhetoric are symptomatic of a broader threat to everything we believe in.
The Prime Minister also addressed reports a deal with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol could be imminent. Rishi Sunak, who was greeted by the German Chancellor at the summit, Olaf Scholz, said both parties understand what needs to be done to solve post-Brexit trade problems, but no deal has been agreed yet. He's expected to hold talks with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, this afternoon.
I'm working very hard together with my ministerial colleagues, foreign secretaries in the audience, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. We are working very closely together. We're engaging in those conversations with the European Union.
Next week, potentially?
All the time, and we have been for a while. But what I'd say is there is still work to do. I think there is still work to do. There are still challenges to work through. We have not resolved all these issues. No, there isn't a deal that has been done.
The body of former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu has been recovered in Turkey. His agent confirmed the Ghanaian, who played for Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found under the rubble of his home almost 2 weeks after the earthquakes. More than 45,000 people have been killed in Turkey and Syria. Rescue efforts continue, though. This morning, a child was among 3 people saved 296 hours after the first quake struck. One of the UK's richest people, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, has confirmed his company Ineos has joined the race to buy Manchester United. He is competing with Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, the chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks, to acquire the club from the Glazer family. Sir Jim says he wants to make Manchester United the #1 club in the world again. Railway engineering workers are planning to walk out next month in a dispute over pay. Members of the RMT union at Balfour Beatty will hold 3 48-hour strikes on the 3rd, 10th and 17th of March. They rejected the company's offer of a 5.5% increase in pay, which would have been backdated to April last year. Meanwhile, unions representing thousands of university staff have called off 7 days of strike action over the next 2 weeks. Issuing a joint statement, they said an agreement's been reached on pay and pensions, with a final pay offer of between 5 and 8% from August. However, the 5 planned strikes in mid-March over grading and 0 hours contracts will still go ahead. South Korea has condemned the North for firing a ballistic missile, describing the move as a clear breach of UN resolutions. Pyongyang launched a missile into the sea off its east coast this morning. The US and South Korea are preparing for annual military drills. North Korea fired an unprecedented number of missiles last year, including those with the ability to strike anywhere in the United States. Almost 2,000 homes in Aberdeen are still without power after Storm Otto. Strong winds caused blackouts across both Scotland and Northern England yesterday. Most properties, though, have now been reconnected to the grid. Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks says it sent food vans to affected areas and it hopes all power will be restored by the end of the day. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now it's back to Emily.
By now, you've probably all seen South Park's animated roasting of Prince Harry and Meghan. Some called it brutal, others are calling it genius. I think you can guess where I stand. But what's so beautiful about the whole thing is that I think the pair clearly thought they'd be the next Obamas. I reckon they thought, well, if Britain is fed up with us, America will lap us up. But from where I'm standing, they're just a less likeable version of the Kardashians. And it's not just me saying this. Polling from Redfield and Wilton shows Americans have also had quite enough of the vacuous duo. Since December, Meghan's popularity has plummeted by a massive 36 points. Prince Harry's is down a staggering 45 points. Put simply, they're not doing well on either side of the Atlantic. In Harry's words, he had to flee the UK, didn't he? Fearing for his family's safety, as if Britain was some kind of war zone and he and his wife a persecuted minority. Instead of counting their blessings and pursuing something meaningful, what did they do? Netflix, Spotify, book launches, late-night chat shows, you name it, they've done it, all while demanding their privacy, naturally. Now, if you ask me, this is one of the most privileged couples in the world, but showed no shame at all in presenting themselves as victims. Victims of the monarchy, victims of the tabloid press, that they're happy to endlessly feed, of course, and even victims of Brexit. To me, they really do reflect the worst of our culture. A culture that says, no matter how lucky you are, no matter how many advantages you have, no matter what platform you're handed, you can still be a victim if you know the right buzzwords. But I sense a change may be afoot. Virtue signalling and latching onto the latest progressive causes can only go so far until people suss you out. We've seen how Nicola Sturgeon was skewered by pandering to progressive wokery. Before her, New Zealand's Be Kind Jacinda Ardern threw in the towel after opinion polls showed she was on her way out. Watching the South Park mockery, I imagine Prince Harry and Meghan are fuming. How dare they make fun of us? Why can't they see how wonderful we are? How can they not see that we're the hard done-by ones here? Well, it turns out that both the British people and Americans are a little smarter than that, and the chickens are firmly coming home to roost. Right, there's my view on Prince Harry and Meghan. Please do let me know what you think. I'll be speaking to a commentator later to get his reaction on that South Park mockery. Anyway, here's what's coming up on the show this hour. Lancashire Police has offered an explanation to the Home Office and referred itself to the police watchdog following the disclosure that Nicola Bulley had a past struggle with alcohol and perimenopause. Miss Bulley's relatives asked the public to end the appalling levels of speculation and rumours about her private life. I'll be asking, do you still have faith in the police? And the International Institute for Strategic Studies think tank has warned that Britain risks falling behind France as NATO's foremost military power in Europe. So should Whitehall increase defence spending or risk the UK becoming outgunned by our next-door neighbour? Then later on in the show, the number of migrants arriving in the UK via small boat crossings over the Channel has risen a whopping 86% compared to last year's figures. The Times are also reporting, and I'll also be joined by my political panel to discuss what the UK's next step should be in discouraging these illegal crossings. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. As always, I'd love to know your thoughts on today's topics. Please do tweet me at GBNews, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can also watch us online on YouTube. Stay tuned. Right, well, the already tainted image of Britain's police forces took a further hit this week after Lancashire police were heavily criticised, wrongly or rightly, for their decision to disclose details of Nicola Bulley's private life, including that she suffered from alcoholism in the months leading up to her disappearance. However, there has been some positive news for the police. It was revealed this week also that the Met's counter-terror unit has foiled 8 late-stage school terror plots over the last year. But with all the scandals that have hit them over the last year, do you still have faith in the police? Are we right to have lost a bit of faith in the police, or should we get behind them? Because after all, they are the ones that solve the crimes. The Raise the Alarm protest against the police has just started outside Scotland Yard today, actually. Copwatch Network says they are protesting against the institution that protects and produces rapists, such as David Carrick and Wayne Cousins. It's all painting a pretty bleak picture. Our national reporter, Theo Chicomba, is outside New Scotland Yard for us now. Theo, what's going on over there?
Well, just a few moments ago, protesters have just arrived. You probably see them just over my left shoulder. There are a number of them who are here raising those questions which you have just mentioned there. It's not just the Met Police, it's police forces across the country who've had their fair share of challenges, and they are trying to get those police officers out of the force who are abusing their roles and doing what the public say is not acceptable in such a high-profile role, and one that's important to communities across the country. Specifically here in London, we heard from the Met Commissioner who took over from Dame Cressida Dick just a few weeks ago. He was speaking at the London Assembly for the police. He was saying during that committee meeting, prepare for more painful stories as the force confronts the issues it faces. And he went on to say there's a trickle of them and more are going to be surfacing over the next couple of weeks and months as the Met attempts to get rid of some of those people who are in the Met at the moment. And he went on to say we haven't applied the same sense of ruthlessness to guarding our own integrity, and we have routinely applied to confronting criminals, and I'm deeply sorry for that. So that's why these protesters are here saying the police need to answer many of their questions for a safer police force within the country.
Thank you very much indeed, Theo. That was Theo Chicomba, national reporter outside Scotland Yard. It seems things are heating up. To give their thoughts on this, I've got former Met detective Peter Blexley in the studio with me, and also the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire, Donna Jones. Thank you very much both for joining me. Peter, I'll get your thoughts first, really. Just on what you've seen there with Theo outside Scotland Yard, there is anger brewing against the police in terms of David Carrick, Wayne Couzens. It seems to be scandal after scandal.
The anger, the lack of confidence and the lack of trust in British policing spreads far, far further than just the pavements outside New Scotland Yard. And it's no surprise to me and millions of others, I'm sure. We have had a litany of utterly appalling scandal after scandal. And yet again, yesterday, another police officer appearing in court charged with rape and other sexually related offences. When is it ever going to stop? Well, I fear it's going to be a long time before it does, but really dramatic, radical things have to be done, or else the model of policing by consent is truly at risk.
Donna, do you accept the pretty bleak picture there that Peter has painted?
Yeah, I do accept that the trust and confidence in policing across the country has taken a massive blow, particularly over the last 2 years. The Me Too movement, victims coming forward, historic offences being reported. Police officers are, the same as many other people across the country, but they are given this very special protected position that they carry a warrant card. Now, we know that we are always going to have bad people, whether it's in journalism, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in policing. The difference is about how a police force or how a hospital or how a news agency deals with those complaints and those issues when they come in. The Met got this wrong. They knew, for example, with David Carrick, there was stuff going on with him for a number of years. 2 decades he was able to abuse his position. So I don't think police forces should be judged about the bad people they have in them. Listen, where they should be judged is about how they deal with them when they become aware of them. And the Met got this wrong.
Peter, of course, the big story this week has been the Nicola Bulley story, mysterious case. It's been 3 weeks or more now since she disappeared. There has been huge amounts of criticism levelled at Lancashire Police, and I can't help but feel that some of it isn't fair in terms of revealing these details. Apparently they did have the say-so from the family. Apparently there were also reports that people were selling or willing to sell stories about this woman who has disappeared. So sometimes the police seem to get abuse when perhaps they don't deserve it. What do you think?
Lancashire Police's handling of the information flow, their communications with the media and then in turn the public, has been absolutely catastrophic. It's been appalling. And actually, the words alcohol and perimenopause have been used have become a distraction from what the real issue is here. And what Lancashire Police have done, and maybe what they've tried to advise Nicola's partner to do, is actually suppress the truth. And that's a very serious matter. They've only released information when they've been backed into a corner because of the nationwide media and huge public interest. Nobody within Lancashire Police, in terms of the communications, has had the ability to look round the corner, to anticipate what might be coming down the line, and essentially, from the very start, tell the truth. When Nicola went missing, on the first day or the second day, very early on, they had said this is a vulnerable woman with mental health issues, both of which matters would have been factually correct. That would have quite possibly stopped any further more invasive details having to be released, and of course would have been truthful. Not to mention the fact, of course, that Lancashire Police chose not to release the details of their visit to Nicola's house on the 10th of January. That's the matter that's been reported to the IOPC, and once again, we've got police behaving appallingly.
But Donna, do you think they could have anticipated that this particular case would have had this much media and public interest? Because, of course, I think it's hundreds of thousands of people go missing in this country every year. Do you think perhaps they were simply overwhelmed, to put it kindly? Of course, they're not here to give their case.
It feels to me like the media strategy has been handled by several different people and there's not been a consensus flow here. As you've just quite rightly said, hundreds of thousands of people go missing every year. And if this had been a lady called Nicola Bulley has gone missing today, in this particular area near the River Wire, and we're asking people to be vigilant and keep their eyes and ears open and report anything, it would not have had the media speculation it has. I think they appear to have been quick to say that she'd fallen in the water. We obviously don't know the full facts of what's been going on. We only know parts of it. And so it is dangerous to us to be speculating. However, if she was registered as a missing person who perhaps was vulnerable, and normally that's as far as the police will go. So if it's someone who's got dementia, or it's a young person, a young female who's at risk of child sexual exploitation, a 16-year-old girl that may have gone missing, they will class them as vulnerable, which highlights to the public there is more going on here. If that's what had been put out, I don't think there would have been this big media speculation, and perhaps it would have given Lancashire Police more time to have got their thoughts and the hypothesis around what has happened to the tragedy of the missing Nicola Bulley. It would have given them a bit more breathing space here. It doesn't appear to have been handled well, but like I say, I'm loath to criticise another police force at this stage because we only have a percentage of the information.
And therein lies part of the problem, Donna, because you as a police and crime commissioner, reluctant to criticise, so many of the facts are there. So many of the facts actually deserve criticism. And you will be seen by viewers and listeners watching this as part of the policing establishment and somebody who's manifestly failing or unwilling to stand up to wrongdoing, to hold these people to account and to give us a police service the length and breadth of the country that is fit for purpose, truthful, open and honest, and doesn't employ criminals.
Donna, I guess Peter's right in a way that there will be people at home who think you would say that, you're a police and crime commissioner, you would say, well, essentially want to not cover their backs, but give them the benefit of the doubt when perhaps they need more scrutiny, more criticism, and for their failures to be held to account.
No, well, I disagree with that. Peter was the establishment. He was a police officer. I'm not. I'm a member of the public. I'm somebody who stood up, put my head above the parapet, stood up for election, and I'm stood up being counted for the 2 million people that I represent. But I am also a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, and I'm cognizant of the fact that she's got 2 little girls out there and a partner and her parents who are heartbroken, and I'm trying to provide some calm here, which is what, by the way, the force and the family have asked to happen. Now, the IOPC are looking into this. They will come up with their investigations. It's not for me to try and get Lancashire Police off the hook in any way. This is about trying to bring some calm to enable professionals to do the job that they need to do, both in terms of the complaint and the detectives that are working on this case at the moment, to try and get to the truth of what's happened. Some of this mudslinging doesn't help. We will get there with the outcome of the IOPC investigation.
Well, Peter, just very quickly, that is true what Donna said there. We do create a circus, do we not?
There are many people, the length and breadth of the country, who have reported matters to the IOPC and have had very unsatisfactory conclusions to those investigations. So I'm not taking that at all. Donna failed to point out that she's a politician and, of course, politician from a party that used to claim to be the party of law and order. Well, that, of course, sadly now, is utterly laughable. The only way that policing is going to get out of this crisis and try and regain trust and confidence is by looking itself in the mirror, accepting when it's wrong, as opposed to being forced to admit that things are wrong, and being truthful. And at the moment, we're a long, long way away from that with too many police services in the country.
Donna, I'll give you the last word.
Well, you know, Peter calls me a politician. We're both here on TV giving our opinions. The difference between me and Peter is that I have a legal mandate to do this because I've been elected by 2 million people. I'll leave it there.
Well, there we go. Feisty stuff. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the show today. Even though you've got very different views, thank you. I think that was very informative indeed. Thank you. Former Met Detective Peter Blexley here in the studio and the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire, Donna Jones. 2 very different views there. Let me know what you think. Are you on Peter's side? Do you think the police need to be held very much to account on this one and that they have failed us? Or are you with Donna that we need to be a little more balanced, perhaps, on this one? Thank you very much indeed. Now, plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. After the break, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, that's quite difficult to say, think tank, has warned that Britain risks falling behind France as NATO's foremost military power in Europe. So should Whitehall increase defence spending or risk the UK becoming outgunned by our next-door neighbour? First, let's have a look at the weather.
Hello, I'm Craig Snell and here's your latest forecast from the Met Office. Well, as we go through the next few days, It's set to remain changeable across the north of the UK, but further south it's going to be fairly mild, but for most of us it's going to be turning a good deal colder come the middle of next week. So here's the situation at the moment. We've got an area of low pressure across the north, bringing in a spell of rain here. Still some lingering rain across the English Channel, but as the evening goes on we will see that begin to clear away into the continent. The rain across Scotland and northern England also moving away as we go into the small hours of Sunday, but that will briefly allow something a bit clearer and colder for Scotland, so risk of some icy stretches here. Cooler elsewhere compared to recent nights, but still on the mild side. Temperatures for most towns and cities not falling much lower than 7 or 8 degrees. So a quiet start in the south on Sunday, but rain already working its way into western Scotland, and that will move its way eastwards as the morning goes on. Bringing in a lot of cloud also for Northern Ireland and Northern England. Could just see a few spits and spots of rain here too, especially across the high ground. But further south, here's where we see the lion's share of the sunshine, especially come the afternoon across southwestern England, central southern England, and temperatures here reaching 14 or 15 degrees. A milder day tomorrow compared to today across Scotland, but that'll be tempered somewhat by a keen wind which will reach gale force later on in the evening as this rain continues to work its way southeastwards as the night goes on. Further south, fairly quiet, but a bit more wind around, but that will help keep temperatures up around 7 or 8 degrees. So Monday we will see a bit of a north-south split across the country. This area of rain will slowly work its way a little bit further southwards, so quite a breezy, wet picture for much of Scotland, Northern Ireland and eventually into Northern England. But further south, remaining dry, some brighter spells and still mild here. And that continues on into Tuesday, but then a change on Wednesday. All of us turning colder with a risk of some wintry showers in the north.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, well, that was quite a punchy debate between the Police and Crime Commissioner there and Peter Bleksley. Please do let me know what you think. Do you think we're right to be losing trust in the police, or do you think perhaps we should cut them a bit of slack, particularly over this Nicola Bulley case? I feel like the media have been making all sorts of speculations. The public have too. Is that right? Should they just be left to get on with it, really. Anyway, welcome back. This is Real Britain, of course. Now, we're going to be talking about something different now. Are we being outgunned by France? The International Institute for Strategic Studies has warned that Britain risks falling behind France as Europe's foremost military power. The latest figures reveal that France has more combat aircraft, frigates and troops than Britain, despite spending significantly less on defence. Go figure. According to one senior researcher at the think tank, the jury is still out on whether the UK still has the most capable military in Europe. Of course, the revelations are likely to increase pressure on Rishi Sunak to increase defence spending, which he is supposedly still reluctant to do. So, to discuss this, I am now joined by retired British Army officer Major General Tim Cross. No one better, really. Tim, thank you very much. So, firstly, should we fact-check here? Do we have a worse military than the French? Because a lot of us will not believe that. We'll not allow ourselves to believe that.
No, we don't. No, we don't. I lived in and worked in France for 2 years on a tri-national guided weapons programme with the French and the Germans. And I've worked a lot with the French over the years, and they are a very good military. But this idea that somehow they are, far superior to us, I don't go along with. Now, to be fair to IISS, they've said there is a risk here. They haven't said it's happened. They're talking about it being a risk. We roughly spend the same amount of money on defence as France and Germany, around 50 billion. The actual money, the extra money that came in last year does make a difference, and we are now spending more. But there is a difference between us. The French, generally speaking, have been involved in relatively small and medium-scale warfare operations. They've done a lot in Africa recently, in places like the Sahel, Mali, Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, and so on. And interestingly, we have helped them out in some of those operations, particularly with our logistics and our airlift and so on. And our combat support and combat service support tends to be deeper and better. But they are very good at those sorts of operations. In the first Gulf campaign that I took part in 1990, they did not put into the field a strong, self-sustaining armoured division, which we do. And this debate really, in my view, is not about whether France is somehow catching us up and going superior to us. It's about whether we are falling down to their level in our ability to conduct high-intensity war-fighting operations at divisional level alongside or within an American corps, for example. And that is the issue. And I do have concerns about that. I call it the critical mass below which we should not allow our army to fall. And there's no doubt that we are. If we're not below it, then we're pretty well close to going below it. So the whole issue is, do we need to regain that?
But Tim, is it a question then of the fact that perhaps we're just using our military more, so therefore it becomes depleted? Well, the latest example is Ukraine, of course. We're sending huge amounts of military. I assume we're sending quite a bit more than the French are. So we're using it up, and it takes some time to regain what we've lost.
Yeah, we're not sending military as in, our own manpower. We're not putting people into the fight, but we are putting a lot of stuff into the fight. And we've been doing that for quite a long time, prior to the invasion, actually. And we are training a lot of Ukrainians back here in the United Kingdom. And the French have been slower at that. There's no doubt about it. And President Macron has been criticised for it. And our own stocks are being depleted. So there's an issue here about, how do we replace the stocks that we're giving to Ukraine? And there is, for example, the Air Force, which you made the point earlier on. I think the French have got more aeroplanes, but there's a debate about the capabilities of those aeroplanes. But our RAF have been using a lot of air power in the Baltic states, in Estonia, and various other places around the world, in Iraq and so on. So we are using a lot of our stuff. And the big issue, and Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, is absolutely right to be pushing for this, is we need to be given more resources to enable us to rebuild those stocks and get ourselves to a position where we can again put, as I said earlier, a self-sustaining armoured division into the field and be able to keep it there as a war-fighting organisation for a long period of time.
Yes,
we used to be able to do that. We can't do it at the moment.
Yeah, because Tim, I don't know if you've seen, but I'm sure you're aware, Rishi Sunak has been at the Munich Security Conference, and he's been saying, and I quote, "Now is the moment to double down on our military support." If the Treasury is being a bit ham-fisted when it comes to giving money to defence, upping that defence spending, surely it must be the top priority if he's going to go around saying we need to double down on our support.
Well, there's two things here. First of all, you would expect me to say, having spent 43 years man and boy in the military, that defence and security is the number one priority for any government. Now, how we define that is another, we could spend a long time defining that, but nonetheless, it is the top priority. There are two issues. One is the stuff we're giving to Ukraine to enable them to conduct their own defensive and hopefully at some point offensive operations. And the ability to do that Ukraine relies on the West as a whole, not just the United Kingdom, but the West as a whole to give them those resources. And other countries have been pretty reluctant to do that so far. We've been pretty good at it. The second issue is having our own defence expenditure increase to allow us to increase this resilience. And to be fair, the French have just increased their defence spending. The Germans have said they're going to do that too. So Rishi Sunak can't, in a sense, have it both ways.
Well, Tim, perhaps it's good that we're competing with our allies and our neighbours in this way. No one wants to be the lesser military, perhaps. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. That was, of course, Tim Cross, retired British Army officer. And you're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. After the break, the number of migrants arriving in the UK via small boat crossings over the Channel has risen 86% compared to last year's figures already. I'll be joined by my political panel to discuss that. But first, let's get a check on the news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
It's 2:33. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. As you've just been hearing, the UK will be the first country to provide longer-range weapons to Ukraine, with the Prime Minister saying now is the time to double down on military support. Addressing the Munich Security Conference, Rishi Sunak said the world's response to Russian aggression hasn't been strong enough. He told allies advanced NATO standard capabilities are needed to counter the Kremlin's attack, and Moscow must be held to account for crimes against humanity.
What's at stake in this war is even greater than the security and sovereignty of one nation. It's about the security and sovereignty of every nation. Because Russia's invasion, its abhorrent war crimes and irresponsible nuclear rhetoric are symptomatic of a broader threat to everything we believe in.
Well, the Prime Minister also confirmed Britain and the EU have an understanding on how to solve problems with the Northern Ireland Protocol, but said no deal has been done. Rishi Sunak, who was greeted at the summit by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, has now held talks with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. The body of former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu has been recovered in Turkey. His agent confirmed the Ghanaian international, who had spells at Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found almost 2 weeks after the earthquakes. More than 45,000 people have been killed in Turkey and Syria. This morning, though, a child was among 3 people to be rescued 296 hours after the first quake struck. And the British billionaire Sir Jim Ratcliffe has confirmed his company Ineos has joined the race to buy Manchester United. The chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks, Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, has also tabled a bid. Sir Jim says he wants to make the club a beacon for a modern, progressive, fan-centred approach to ownership, which is focused on winning the Champions League. TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News, but don't go anywhere. Emily is back in just a moment.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB plus radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Yes, welcome back. This is Real Britain on GB News TV, online and digital radio. Now, figures released by the Home Office this week reveal that the number of people arriving in the UK after crossing the Channel in a small boat is 86% higher than this time last year. As of Tuesday, the figure stood at 2,517 compared to 1,352 at the same point last year, which has led to fears that 2023 will be another record-breaking year for the Channel crossings after almost 46,000 people, of course, made the journey last year. This is despite Rishi Sunak making stopping the boats one of his 5 key pledges to voters. So, with the UK seemingly unable to put an end to the small boats crisis, should we adopt an open border policy to ensure those seeking to enter the UK get here safely? To debate this, I'm joined by political commentator Emma Webb, and friend of the show, of course, and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Now, this might sound like a bit of an extreme and silly question to put that we should open the borders, but to many people, it seems like our borders are so porous, Peter, that we may as well just fling them open.
Well, you've got to make a distinction between what the policy is and then whether it's actually enforced. But I think there's no appetite in Britain for open borders, and any politician, any politician who said that would have been deaf to the message of the 2016 Brexit referendum. And even Jeremy Corbyn, who is no longer a Labour MP, but even when he was leader, he wasn't really advocating for open borders. The question is, how do you have a policy? How do you enforce it? But ultimately, how do you keep people safe? Because there's a tragedy, and although there's a lot of back and forth in Westminster, there's a tragedy because people are dying trying to cross the water to get to Britain.
Yes, but it does seem, now Mark White delivered this, I believe it was an exclusive for GB News, that migrants are now using more dangerous routes than they were before. So it seems like perhaps some of the money to the French is actually working, could actually be working, but then it's no good if people are risking their lives even more by taking a more dangerous route.
That's desperately trying to find a silver lining and thinking that the money that we're giving to the French is going to any use. I think the idea...
That's me. Positive spin. Positive spin.
Always smiling, Emily. I think the idea that in response to this, that we should fling open the borders is absurd. Firstly, I don't think that would necessarily stop people from taking these journeys, because I don't think that's necessarily going to stop people smugglers. But, the British people want our borders to be secure. We need our borders to be secure because it's about national security. We've seen this in so many instances. We've seen recently a schoolgirl allegedly being raped by 2 migrant youths. We've seen murders at the hands of people who have come into this country. So, for security reasons, we need to know who's coming into the country. So we can't just fling open the doors and let anybody come in.
Well, it seems to me that if you do arrive in this country via dinghy, there's little chance of you being sent back to the country you came from or sent back anywhere else. So we kind of do have an open border when it comes to the Channel.
No, I don't think so at all. And I suspect if you talk to some of the people arriving in these terrible circumstances, obviously, sadly, some don't complete the journey alive, but the people who do, it's not open at all. There's a series of kind of police and Home Office measures. There's a regime that I think has holes in it. It lacks compassion, and that's effective. And obviously, the Labour Party, which I don't represent, but obviously I'm a member of and I'm sympathetic to, would say some of the policies are wrong as well. And it's very interesting to hear you mention a cooperation with France, because that was something the Labour Party has been calling for over a year. Now it seems to be happening, because at the end of the day, keeping people safe, stopping people dying, involves working closer with the EU, referendum or no referendum.
Well, Peter, you say that, but the government have been trying to work with France for a long time. This isn't.
Well, they've had a lot of fallings out with them.
This isn't the first.
A lot of silly fallings out.
Well, you know, you could say that both sides have been a little bit tetchy over the last few years for many reasons.
There's history there.
There's history there. That's where I'm going. There's history there, of course. But Emma, we've seen there's been, well, a lot of heat. There have been groups, it's been reported in the Times today, that there have been groups of people purposefully turning up at hotels to cause trouble, to protest against migrants being there. Is this just a sign that something has to be done? Because the problem is that when this happens, it makes the discussion even more divided. People go after the emotional arguments rather than the practical ones.
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of accusations from political leaders pretty much across the board against, say, the Home Secretary's rhetoric around illegal migrant crossings, accusations that that is what has inflamed tensions. I think what has inflamed tensions is the fact that the government, you know, it's not what the government says, it's what the government does, and or more to the point, what the government hasn't done, because our policies surrounding migration, particularly illegal migration across the Channel, is just clearly not working. It's storing up so much resentment in the population. I think that, you know, people are quite right to feel that this situation is absolutely untenable. You just have to look at the numbers. You know, last year we saw a record high of 46,000 people coming across the Channel illegally, and that's just across the Channel, and those are just the people that we know about. So that's the bottom level. We're expecting up to 80,000 to come this year. This situation is completely unsustainable, and we keep seeing increasing incidents where this is actually putting people's safety at risk. I think that the public need to see the government actually doing something about this. Otherwise, of course, tensions will get worse, and of course, there will be certain groups who will try to exploit this for their own purposes on both sides.
But that's a good point, isn't it, Peter? Because you talk about compassion, and a lot of the left talk about compassion, particularly when right-wingers say that we need to have more security at the border and that we can't have these crossings and that we need to send people back, etc., etc. But where's the compassion in refusing to acknowledge that people are taking advantage of this route and may have hostile motivations or may not qualify for asylum? It seems that the debate is so difficult to have with some people who just say, oh, well, you have to have compassion. But people's compassion is for their country as well, the safety of their country, security, etc., etc.
Well, it's possible to be both realistic and compassionate, and there's anger on both sides, whether people are angry about the numbers coming into Britain or perhaps a bit more like me and people on the left angry about the treatment of people arriving here. But I think we can all agree there is no place for vigilantism. That is not the answer at all, and anyone that turns up at a so-called migrant hostel or hotel shouting and waving placards, that's madness. They can direct their frustration towards the government or towards Westminster in a lawful way, but people turning up shouting good knows what at migrants is completely unacceptable. I think the Labour Party has been realistic in the past. It's obviously been on a bit of a journey. If you cast your mind back to the Ed Miliband era, last time Yvette Cooper was Shadow Home Secretary on this brief, she was very tough and actually provoked a bit of revolt within the Labour Party. So Labour has listened to the public, and I think Labour is completely realistic.
Well, that's a good point, actually, Emma, isn't it? The Labour Party have been talking quite tough. Do you believe them, though? Because they are the party of Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, well, not Jeremy Corbyn, but others who would like to see the borders flung open.
Well, I think the doors were flung open by Tony Blair, so the Labour Party has an awful lot to answer for in this department. I certainly wouldn't trust them with our immigration
policy.
But sorry,
that is lawful migration rather than open borders. That's a different thing.
But it's the context, isn't it? Because I think people would be less worried about numbers, not necessarily with the boat crossings, but just in general, if we hadn't had years and years of migration being in the net hundreds and thousands.
Yeah, repeatedly, the British public, when polled, want immigration to be taken under control. every single election, the British public always vote for more controls on immigration, but the numbers have gone up and up and up, despite all of the talk from successive governments on both sides of the House. And so I think the British public are frankly getting fed up. And the more that we continue to see these incidents occurring where, you know, as with the case of, even as you were saying about the treatment of migrants, the fact that there was a young boy who, 2 cases actually, of child sexual exploitation taking place in one of these migrant hotels, plenty of other cases. I think people are getting really sick of the way this is being dealt with because the successive governments have talked tough and done absolutely nothing. Are we a sovereign country or are we not? You mentioned Brexit. We should be able to get control over this situation. We shouldn't have a situation on our hands where we're unable to deport even violent criminals because we're still in the EHRC.
Does the Labour Party risk, Peter, demonising people that they purport to represent, i.e. the working class? We've seen that hotels have perhaps been disproportionately located in deprived areas or areas where resources are scant already. So when you ask them, and they perceive, rightly or wrongly, that those resources are now being spent on people who have just arrived in a dinghy, are they not right to be angry? Obviously, vigilantism is a disgusting thing to do, and it's, well, no one in their right mind should do that. But can you understand why there is a level of anger in those particular communities?
Well, you're asking me a few different questions, but the only group being demonised in society is migrants, and I'm afraid, and I've tried not to be party political, it's absolutely the right wing of British politics, like the Conservative Party, not the people on the panel today, but it's a Conservative Party in Parliament that is demonising migrants. And although I apologise for interrupting earlier, it's important to clarify this because Tories have deliberately blurred the line between 3 different areas, between legal migration, that's economic, illegal migration and asylum claims, and they're all measured in different ways and enforced in different ways. And the Tories have blurred the line on that deliberately for party political gain.
Well, what evidence do you have, very quickly, Peter, for how they've blurred the lines? What, you think they just talk about illegal immigration, small boats and migration in the same breath, essentially? Is that what you're saying?
You're on the right line. They talk about people coming over here and they talk about our rights, and I think there's a bit of an innuendo about British culture being undermined. But these are all different groups, and someone coming from a war zone is very different to an economic migrant.
I just think we're in a country where people have been crying out. They've been telling politicians that they don't want this to continue. Nothing seems to be done, and then they're surprised when, you know, the boiling water overflows out of the pot. Anyway, lots of you have been sending in your thoughts on the topics we have been discussing. On the small boats crisis, Eric says, we should require the lifeboat men to ask where the migrants began that leg of their journey and safely return them to their starting point. Well, I'm not sure they'd necessarily tell the truth if they're so determined to arrive in the UK, but it's a starting point. Jean says, I find it disgraceful that old people who have paid into the system their whole lives are forced to sell their homes to pay for their care, yet people who have come here illegally and done nothing for this country are totally paid for. This is what I'm saying. British people have a sense of fair play, and it doesn't seem like there's fair play at the moment. And on my monologue on Harry and Meghan, Christine says, I completely agree with your views on Harry and Meghan. My husband and I watched the South Park episode, having never watched South Park before, and thought it summed them up pretty well, as well explaining very clearly the brand management of people. Hopefully we will now turn a corner on wokery and everything that it encompasses and turn our backs on Harry and Meghan. I think we are. I think we're all collectively turning our backs here and on the other side of the Atlantic. Thank you very much indeed for sending in your views. Please do keep them coming. Now we're going to be moving on to some football news, but it has quite a lot to do with the state of Britain, perhaps. One of the UK's richest people, Sir Jim Radcliffe, has reportedly joined the race to buy Manchester United, my team. It comes as Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, I think that's how you pronounce it, the chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks, confirmed his bid to acquire the club from the Glazer family. This got me thinking. After the acquisition of Newcastle last year and Manchester City in 2008, is it a problem that British brands or institutions are foreign-owned? Now, still with me is my political panel, Peter Edwards and Emma Webb, but I've also got Aidan McGee, who's going to give us the lowdown, please. So we're on a level playing field, so we all understand what's going on here.
So last night, the merchant bank in New York, a company called the Rain Group, who managed Chelsea's sale last year, they set a soft deadline for bidders to declare their interest for Manchester United. So only a few people in the world can afford to do that. Not many people have got that many billions of pounds sloshing around in their back pocket. Nonetheless, we did see the colour of the Qatari money. They bid £4 billion. We also saw Jim Radcliffe, as you mentioned there, born in Oldham, Chelsea season ticket holder but a Man United supporter. He was in the bidding for Chelsea actually last year, so the Rain Group will know his email address quite well, I would have thought. But we don't know how much he bid, but he's relying on loans from JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, two big guys in the city there, the banks. The difference with Qatar bid is that it's not going to be leveraging any debt against the club. Now, the problem the Qataris have, and to a lesser degree Radcliffe has, is that they own clubs outside of these shores. The Qatari bid is they've heavily been involved with Paris Saint-Germain, a Champions League club, since 2011. Jim Radcliffe, he owns Nice in Ligue 1 in France. They're only 4 points off Europe, so it's possible they could compete in the same competitions within Europe. The reason we may not see a Saudi bid, we've not heard anything out of them, is because they already own Newcastle United. Newcastle United poses a different problem because then you'd be owning two clubs in the Premier League. That's a completely different ballgame to managing two clubs in Europe. So we've had two bids so far. Is there going to be one from America? Well, there's suggestions that David Beckham may be involved. I think he would have to think long and hard about whether to get involved with the right bidder, because he's had his reputation damaged ever so slightly in the last few months due to his involvement with Qatar itself. Yep. And then Elon Musk has said, well, I'm interested in buying Man United. So I don't think anyone took him seriously, but evidently people did. I don't think you'll be seeing him bid anytime soon. Other than that...
It's a bit of willy waving, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah. Not something I'd engage in, but I know what you're saying, in the commercial sense.
Manchester United. No, I can.
Yeah, I mean, look...
It's what every rich man wants,
Well, the other thing is we should say about the value. These bids, the reason the bids are relatively low, although it seems like $4 billion isn't a low bid, it is quite low because they're lowballing the market so far. What the Rain Group have done is they've created a market in the sense that they've already got two bidders, so they believe they can get between £7 and £8 million, possibly even £1 billion, for Manchester United. Yeah, exactly. You could buy a few houses in Bromley for that. So, additionally, you can have a situation where the Glazers would settle for between 5 and 6 billion. The New York Stock Exchange yesterday valued it at 3.9 billion. But now they've created a market, the sky's the limit in terms of the price. Will it happen quickly? Depends, because the Glazers won't sell it cheap.
Right, well, there you go. There's the context. Peter, are you a footballing fan? Yeah. Do you think it's a problem that we're selling off our clubs to whoever is the highest bidder?
Well, I'm a Liverpool fan, but I'm also a football fan more broadly, and it is a community game. And much as I love it, it's a game that stopped being English a long time ago. Yeah. The clubs are owned by foreign magnates. Many of the players, it's probably over half in the Premier League, are foreign players. A lot of the money comes in from the global TV audience. The sponsors are global, and even many of the British ones, unfortunately, are either they're British betting companies or betting companies based offshore. There's not much that's English about the English Premier League, and I think that's something that all football supporters of any stripe would agree with. On Manchester United, I think we're all concerned about Qatar. You know, the World Cup, huge number of corruption allegations in the run-up to the awarding of the World Cup to Qatar that we had last year. Deaths of migrant workers constructing the stadiums and their records on human rights and gay rights. Are they welcome to join the Premier League?
Well, are we still... Emma, what do you think? Do you think it's even... Can we even call it a community game anymore, really?
Well, you know me, I don't know the first thing about football, so...
What's your hot take, then, of us selling, essentially, industries to foreign countries?
So this is the thing. I think Peter's right. You know, football used to be a community game, and I think that there's an appeal to that. I might even be interested in football if everybody who was involved in the club was actually from the local area, managed by someone from the local area, owned by someone from the local area. But unfortunately, that's just not the world we're living in. We're living in a globalised world where these big brands, whether it's football or whether it's whiskey, it's a big boys game, and they're owned by these huge conglomerates, or they're owned by some of the world's richest people. And there is an element of status game to it when it comes to the ownership of this. And I think the main issue, I imagine, for many Brits, is the hypocrisy that you see when you have certain footballers trying to take a moral stance, but at the same time their clubs, if they're owned by these countries that are very morally questionable, that looks like an awful lot of hypocrisy. But maybe that will keep politics out of football.
It does very much indeed. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to rudely interrupt you there because we must go to the break. That was, of course, political commentator Emma Webb and former editor of Labour List Peter Edwards and Ada McGee. Thank you very much to you all. This is Real Britain on GB News, TV, online and digital radio. Plenty more coming up on today's show, but first, let's get the weather.
Hello, I'm Craig Snell, and here's your latest forecast from the Met Office. Well, as we go through the next few days, It's set to remain changeable across the north of the UK, but further south it's going to be fairly mild, but for most of us it's going to be turning a good deal colder come the middle of next week. So here's the situation at the moment. We've got an area of low pressure across the north, bringing in a spell of rain here. Still some lingering rain across the English Channel, but as the evening goes on we will see that begin to clear away into the continent. The rain across Scotland and northern England also moving away as we go into the small hours of Sunday, but that will briefly allow something a bit clearer and colder for Scotland, so risk of some icy stretches here. Cooler elsewhere compared to recent nights, but still on the mild side. Temperatures for most towns and cities not falling much lower than 7 or 8 degrees. So a quiet start in the south on Sunday, but rain already working its way into western Scotland, and that will move its way eastwards as the morning goes on. Bringing in a lot of cloud also for Northern Ireland and Northern England. Could just see a few spits and spots of rain here too, especially across the high ground. But further south, here's where we see the lion's share of the sunshine, especially come the afternoon across southwestern England, central southern England, and temperatures here reaching 14 or 15 degrees. A milder day tomorrow compared to today across Scotland, but that'll be tempered somewhat by a keen wind which will reach gale force later on in the evening as this rain continues to work its way southeastwards as the night goes on. Further south, fairly quiet, but a bit more wind around, but that will help keep temperatures up around 7 or 8 degrees. So Monday we will see a bit of a north-south split across the country. This area of rain will slowly work its way a little bit further southwards, so quite a breezy, wet picture for much of Scotland, Northern Ireland and eventually into Northern England. But further south, remaining dry, some brighter spells and still mild here. And that continues on into Tuesday, but then a change on Wednesday. All of us turning colder with a risk of some wintry showers in the north.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, online and digital radio. Now, plenty more coming up on the programme this hour. We'll be finding out what's next for the SNP and, more importantly, the United Kingdom now that Sturgeon's out of the picture. But first, it's the news with Aaron Armstrong.
It's 3 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has urged world leaders to act now and double down on military support for Ukraine. Addressing the Munich Security Conference, Rishi Sunak said the West's response to Russia hasn't been strong enough And he urged allies to follow Britain in providing advanced long-range weapons to Ukraine. He called for NATO to offer ongoing assurances to fight Russian aggression and for Moscow to be held accountable for crimes against humanity.
What's at stake in this war is even greater than the security and sovereignty of one nation. It's about the security and sovereignty of every nation. Because Russia's invasion, its abhorrent war crimes and irresponsible nuclear rhetoric are symptomatic of a broader threat to everything we believe in.
Well, the Prime Minister also said a deal with the European Union on fixing issues with the Northern Ireland Protocol is by no means done. Rishi Sunak, who was greeted by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at the summit, held talks with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Described as a positive discussion, the leaders said intense work was still needed at official and ministerial levels, and they agreed to remain in close contact over the coming days.
I'm working very hard together with my ministerial colleagues, foreign secretaries in the audience, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. We are working very closely together. We're engaging in those conversations with the European Union.
Next week, potentially?
All the time, and we have been for a while. But what I'd say is there is still work to do. I think there is still work to do. There are still challenges to work through. We have not resolved all these issues. No, there isn't a deal that has been done.
The body of the former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu's been recovered in Turkey. His agent confirmed the Ghanaian international, who played for Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found under the rubble of his home almost 2 weeks after the earthquakes. More than 45,000 people have been killed in Turkey and Syria. Rescue efforts, though, are continuing, and this morning a child was amongst 3 people to be saved, 296 hours after the first quake struck. One of the UK's richest people, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, has confirmed his company, Ineos, has joined the race to buy Manchester United. He's competing with Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, the chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks, to acquire the club from the Glazer family. Sir Jim says he wants to make Manchester United the #1 club in the world again. Railway engineering workers are planning to walk out next month in a dispute over pay. Members of the RMT union at Balfour Beatty will hold 3 48-hour strikes on the 3rd, 10th and 17th of March. They rejected the company's offer of a 5.5% pay increase, which would have been backdated to April last year. Meanwhile, unions representing thousands of university staff have called off 7 days of strike action over the next 2 weeks. Issuing a joint statement, they said an agreement's been reached on pay and pensions, with a final pay offer of between 8% and 5% from August. However, the 5 planned strikes in mid-March over grading and 0 hours contracts will still go ahead. South Korea has condemned the North for firing a ballistic missile, describing the move as a clear breach of UN resolutions. Pyongyang launched a missile into the sea off its east coast this morning as the US and South Korea prepare for annual military drills. North Korea fired an unprecedented number of missiles last year, including those with the ability to strike anywhere in the United States. And almost 2,000 homes in Aberdeenshire are still without power after Storm Otto. Strong winds caused blackouts across Scotland and northern England yesterday. Most properties have now been reconnected to the grid. Scottish and Southern electricity networks say it has sent food vans to affected areas and hopes all power will be restored by the end of the day. This is GB News. More, as always, as it happens, but now back to Emily.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Welcome back to Real Britain. Here's what's coming up on the show this hour. The huge political news of the week. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has resigned. She admitted she was a polarising figure and no longer had the energy to lead. With the latest polling figures now showing Labour only 2 points behind the SNP in Scotland, is it game over for Scottish independence? Then, in royal news, the King faced protesters waving "Not My King" placards as he arrived in Milton Keynes to celebrate its new city status this week. And now South Park, of course, as I mentioned at the top of the show, are the latest to take the mick out of Harry and Meghan. Royal commentator Rafe Haydel-Mancu will join me to discuss that one. And later on, there was huge public outrage this week after Centrica, the owner of British Gas, posted a record £3.3 billion in profits. If people think they're taking advantage and they don't deserve these profits, should we just nationalise the lot? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on today's topics. Please do tweet me at GBNews, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can also watch us online, as always, on YouTube. Back in a tick. So yes, the biggest story of this week. Political shockwaves from Boot House in Edinburgh are still reverberating across the United Kingdom. After 8 years in power, Nicola Sturgeon resigned as First Minister. The SNP is already preparing to decide on her successor, but more importantly, decide what exactly they're going to do about independence. With latest polling of Scottish voters in the past week has put Labour just behind the SNP in general election voting intention. You could argue support for independence is waning a little. Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar has said his party is ready for government. In a rallying cry to activists at the party conference, Mr Sarwar made a direct plea to Conservative and SNP voters ahead of the next election, urging them to put their trust in Labour. Our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire is in Edinburgh for us. Tony, what does this leap in the polls for Scottish Labour mean for independence?
Well, it's quite an interesting topic. Certainly me and a few other journalists were able to sit down with Anas Sarwar earlier today, and someone actually posed that very question almost word for word: is independence dead? You know, and I think we got quite a reserved response from Anas Sarwar. Simply put, no, because, you know, the idea is there, and no matter what way the polls swing, it seems that half the country is going to be disappointed either way. So at some point in the future, the independence question is going to have to be asked again. But at some point, even beyond that, we're going to have to find a definite end for this. You know, Scotland voted, you know, in terms of local authorities, unanimously to stay as part of Europe. But here we are a few years later, and we're just getting on with it, really. And I think that same principle will at some point have to be applied to the Scottish independence question. But these divides that separate, you know, huge chunks of the population is something that I was really keen to bring to Anas Sarwar earlier on today. So I simply asked him what was Labour's plan, Scottish Labour and UK Labour, for bringing Scotland a bit together after seemingly a whole decade of division.
A huge opportunity right now in Scotland to move past the politics of division, whether that's SNP division or indeed Tory division, and to demonstrate to people that governments can do more than just manage decline. This isn't as good as it gets. Change is possible. We don't have to pit Scot against Scot or community against community. We can come together, work together to confront the challenges facing Scotland, to strengthen Scotland but also renew and modernise the UK. That's the platform and the pitch the Labour Party is standing on, and that's the one we're confident on heading into the next general election.
And certainly that he wasn't the only person today to be pushing that side of it. Ian Murray, Scotland's only Labour MP just now, just took to the stage at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and certainly his focus, less on independence and more on the SNP leadership race, was very much comparing it to choosing a new captain of the Titanic. What he told the delegates today was that it was just as well that it wasn't a ferry, or else we wouldn't have anything to jump on. Of course, alluding to the two ferries which are still sitting unsaleable, which have at this point now cost more than the Scottish Parliament building. Certainly the independence question is always going to be an issue, but we'll see what happens when Keir Starmer arrives tomorrow.
Thank you very much indeed. That's our Scottish reporter, Tony Maguire. Thank you very much for bringing us the very latest from Edinburgh there. So we're going to be discussing this and more with the former leader of Reform UK Scotland, Michelle Ballantyne, and Alba Party MP Neil Hanvey. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. So you heard there, Labour have some kind of spring in their step, I would say, from watching that last package there. I'll start with you, Michelle. Who do you think the SNP can now recruit who would give Labour a run for their money? Because it does seem like they're running out of time to establish a new successor in the way that Nicola Sturgeon was etched on everyone's minds.
Oh, well, I think that's the major problem they're facing, because the choices they've got is actually quite limited. They've got to choose from within the Holyrood pool. And what you're looking at is probably somebody like Kate Forbes or Angus Robertson or Humza Yousaf, all of which come with issues where the party's concerned. I mean, Kate Forbes has just had a baby. Whether she wants to go back into the fray and take on such a big job is a big question. And of course, her views, her own personal principles won't chime with a lot of the sort of more left-wing socialist members of the party. Angus Robertson has been quite quiet since coming back into Holyrood. And of course, he presided over the failure to get the census delivered effectively. And well, Humza Yousaf, where do I start? He's nicknamed Humza Useless for a lot of reasons, but he isn't considered to be a safe and strong pair of hands. What we really have is no obvious succession. Nicola Sturgeon held power so tightly that she hasn't left the SNP with somebody charismatic who can just walk in, take the party with her. And she herself divided the party. I mean, there's a good reason we have somebody from Alba today, and I think I would probably credit Nicola Sturgeon with creating the ground that Alba is now starting to soak up. And I think it'll be very interesting because I think there's a battle royal coming between those two parties.
Yes, it's quite remarkable how... I'll come to you in a minute, Neil, but it's quite remarkable how Nicola Sturgeon managed to talk about how important it was to rid politics of the divisive language and stop being polarising when, in my view, and I'm sure a lot of people's view, she is one of the most divisive politicians in this country, if not the most. Neil, what do you think? What does this mean for independence? In my mind, it probably puts independence on the back foot.
Well, I think there are a range of views that you can take on that, Emily. I think the first point I would make is that the cause of independence is not about any single individual or indeed about any single political party. There are a variety of parties in Scotland that support the cause of independence, and indeed quite a lot of Civic Scotland who are not party affiliated who support the cause of independence. But it's unavoidable to acknowledge that the recent debacle over the gender recognition reform legislation has driven many people away from the SNP. I think it would be churlish not to acknowledge that. But the important thing is that, the movement, which encapsulates all of the parties, and that's where I think Michelle is very mistaken, is our resolve and some of that divisiveness that you spoke about between different elements of the movement will potentially be healed by this move. And we will be, I'm willing to collaborate with anyone from any party who is interested in furthering the case for Scottish independence. So I don't think it's the big win that the Unionists think it will be. And I think I would caution anyone who thinks that Labour is any kind of solution on gender recognition reform, if that's the issue you're concerned about, because they are committed to delivering that if they are in government. So the only way to solve this significant challenge is to ensure that sex-based rights are enshrined in a written constitution for an independent Scotland.
Well, Michelle, Neil's right there. It could go two ways, couldn't it, when it comes to independence? This could be seen as a bit of a dead end. Nicola herself seemed to try every avenue there was possible to get the second vote she wanted. But also you could see a reinvigoration of the entire movement now that Nicola, who was so divisive, is gone.
There's an element of truth in that, but there are still some very big questions to answer. I mean, you've mentioned the GRR bill. I mean, a large proportion of the MSPs voted for it, including all of Labour, or most of Labour. But actually, Alex Salmon and, as I understand it, Alma were very, very strongly against it. So, and that's just one thing where to come together, they're going to have to really compromise how they're going to do things. And the reason they split up in the first place is because they couldn't agree. They couldn't agree on the route to independence. There is that side of the independence movement who believes they should just go hell for leather, ignore the law, just ram it through regardless of how the population of Scotland feel. And then there is the other side who are much more law-based, who want to do it more gently, who subscribed, and I believe Alex Salmond was one of those originally, who subscribed to winning Scotland over through peaceful democratic means. Get devolution, show the people of Scotland how it could work. In fact, what we in the people of Scotland have found is that since devolution, things in Scotland have got worse.
Well, yes.
So rather than proving to us that independence is a good way forward, it's gone the other way. Our education systems have declined, our transport systems have gone downhill. We've got ridiculous laws like GRR, the named person that they tried to push through. They've now got a bottle return scheme that is just nonsense. So the independence movement, yes, I totally get that they're a movement and lots of people support it. But what you've seen is a lot of people now saying, whoa, hang on a minute. Yes, I want independence, but the direction of travel of the so-called independent supporting parties is really uncomfortable, and it's doing nothing for Scotland and the people of Scotland. So this is a huge mountain to climb.
Yeah, and there's only so long you can keep blaming Westminster if you're proving to be incompetent, perhaps, at running as First Minister. But Neil, very quickly, I'm sorry, we're running out of time, which is a real shame. But Neil, just lastly, who would you fear the most as the next leader of the SNP?
Well, I just challenge Michelle on the idea that Scotland has problems and they are indivisible, or they are divisible from Westminster's control, and that is simply not true. They are indivisible. I'll tell you a wee story rather than give you a prediction.
Or the education.
If I had earned £100,000 every day since the Battle of Bannockburn until today, I still wouldn't have taken the same amount of money out of Scotland as Shell did in profits last year. So to say that Scotland can't afford to have a much better community and service provision is an absolute nonsense. Of course we can be independent. And
Neil,
I would say Ash Reagan.
Neil, I do have sympathy because people said that about Brexit and I did then vote Brexit. So, I don't think that people should be allowed potentially to have the right to try it out. But who would you fear the most as SNP leader?
Well, I would like to see somebody who is not tethered to the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. That legislation was brought forward really at the First Minister's behest. It was never discussed or debated at an SNP conference. I had my troubles in the SNP because I spoke up about my concerns around women's safety, 2.5, 3 years ago, or longer, actually, in 2019. And that is how fiercely the First Minister defended her hobby horse of gender reform. And it's no surprise that it has become this really divisive and problematic issue.
There we go. I think it may.
Proponents have been vicish in the way that they've defended it.
Neil. Sorry to interrupt, but perhaps that will be Kate Forbes, because she, I believe, spoke out against it for women's rights reasons. But thank you very much indeed, both of you, for joining us this afternoon. That was really very interesting. Leader of Reform UK Scotland, Michelle Ballantyne there, and Alba Party MP Neil Hanvey. Very good, lots to think about, lots of differing views. Anyway, we're going to move on to something different. The UK's maritime rescue services are being warned to expect migrant boat crossings over a much wider stretch of southern coastline in the year ahead. It follows a move by people smuggling gangs to launch small boats further south on the French coast to avoid police patrols around Calais and Dunkirk. But is the fact people are using more dangerous routes crossing the Channel proof that the money we're sending the French is actually working? Now, we touched on this before, but joining me to discuss this now is Conservative Councillor for Ash and New Ash Green, Claire Pearsall. Thank you very much for joining us, Claire. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your afternoon. So, do you think this is evidence that the current strategy may be working a little bit, or is that wishful thinking?
Well, I think that we could take some positives from this, and it does look as though the money we've sent over to France has been put to good use. The patrols on the beaches are up, and there are fences going around the points of weakness where people were coming through originally. So I think this is probably a little bit early to say whether it'll work in the long term, but I do think that there are definitely some positive moves between both countries to make this work, and it does seem to be having an effect.
And Claire, just very quickly, we don't have much time, but the Times has been reporting today that the number of groups that are essentially turning up at hotel accommodation and causing trouble because they're angry, they're protesting about the fact migrants are there. People are saying that some of them are far-right groups. What can be done with that? Have you seen that in your backyard?
We haven't seen riots like we're currently seeing at the moment. And I do think that labelling anything as a far-right riot organisation is really lazy. So I wish people would stop doing that. We understand people are angry. And I think that the government needs to get a grip on this and get a grip on it quick before people get hurt. And it's always going to be the wrong people that get hurt. Innocent people will get caught up. And none of us want to see that happen.
Now, because there are thousands, just very quickly as well, there are, of course, thousands of people already in hotel accommodation. What can the government do straight away to just speed up the process and sort those people out before there are thousands more crossing?
They needed to have done this years ago. I think that we all can see that. But in the meantime, they need to speed up the process of asylum applications. They need to have enough staff on board. Those decisions need to be taken quicker. And also returns agreements with EU 27 countries so that once people are processed, if they have no legitimate reason to be here, they can be removed to a different country. Until that's in place, none of this is going to change.
Thank you very much. Almost always common sense and to the point from you, Claire Pearsall. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon on Real Britain to discuss how migrants are using those more dangerous crossings, and also the fact that the Times has been reporting that far-right protesters, as they call them, are essentially going to hotels around the country and causing a bit of trouble. What do you make of that? Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. After the break, we're going to be talking the royals. The King faced protesters waving "Not My King" placards as he arrived in Milton Keynes to celebrate its new city status this week. And now South Park are the latest to take the mick out of Harry and Meghan. Royal commentator Rafe Haydale Manku will join me to discuss that. But first, let's have a break.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, at 9:30 on Sunday morning when I'll be speaking to Penny Mordaunt, Leader of the House of Commons, about defence spending, Nicola Sturgeon and her own prime ministerial ambitions, and much more. I'll also be asking Sir Graham Brady, Chairman of the 1922 Committee of Backbench Tories, how the party plans to win the next general election without Boris Johnson. And Callum Best, son of Manchester United legend George Best, will be telling me what it was like to live in the shadow of a flawed genius. All that and more at 9:30 on Sunday.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Yes, welcome back. This is Real Britain on GB News TV, online and digital radio. Now, some lighter news, perhaps. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have come up on the wrong side of satire. The Sussexes have been ridiculed in a new episode of the hit stateside cartoon South Park. The episode doesn't name the pair specifically, but it's pretty obvious that the characters bear a striking resemblance to Harry and Meghan. Through the course of the episode, they complain about wanting privacy while constantly drawing attention to themselves with media appearances. Let's have a look at a clip of them appearing on a Canadian talk show.
First guest, the Prince and his wife. We want privacy! We want privacy! You've lived a life with the royal family, you've had everything handed to you, but you say your life has been hard, and now you've written all about it in your new book, Where? Yes, that's right, friend. You see, my wife and I are totally like, you should write a book because your family like stupid and then so are like journalists.
Royal broadcaster and commentator Rafe Haydel-Mancu joins me now. Now, Rafe, I'm not sure if you've been asked yet what your instant reaction is to the South Park episode.
Well, I've got to say, I'm actually a fan of South Park. In its early days, I confess I haven't watched it for a few years now, but this really sort of reminded me of the golden age of South Park, and that's really been the response I've seen on social media. People saying this is one of the best episodes of the comedy in years. It's really, satire is a long lost art form in so many areas of life now. People are too scared of giving offence. And South Park, I think, is one of the last true purveyors of proper satire. This is it at its most bitingly brilliant and brutal. I think, anyone seeing this would not be... well, it's clear that it's a merciless skewering, if I can say, of the hypocrisy and the superficiality and the narcissism of the Duke and Duchess of Duplicity. One wonders whether they saw it. We know how keen Harry is to Google himself and his wife and see what's the public's reaction to them. I'm not sure if the royal family would engage in schadenfreude. They're too noble for that, but I'm sure many people are delighted in seeing Harry and Meghan get their just desserts.
Yes, I imagine so. I did give my view at the top of the show, actually. If you want to have a look at the clip, it will be on YouTube and Twitter, of course. But I did wonder about what Prince Harry and Meghan would be saying at home. I think they'd be outraged. Why do people misunderstand us? We're only trying to, save the world from its bigotry, I guess. But it's quite interesting because satire, it doesn't seem to go after the progressives that often. I read an article in The Telegraph, I believe it was today. A columnist had written about how this is great because the satire is actually going against the woke people rather than making fun of, Trump, the easy targets.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I have to say, having watched South Park for the first time in ages, I was interested to see that they have a black cartoon character there called Tolkien, J.R. Tolkien's surname, but actually the way it's pronounced is Token. So I think South Park's been indulging in attacks and criticism of progressives for quite a long while, actually. But I think more broadly, I think this has just really exposed the catastrophic nature of Harry and Meghan's PR strategy. I mean, particularly after the release of Spare, or Wah, as South Park call it, the wailing of a crybaby. I think it's now increasingly... I think it's now increasingly apparent that even those who supported them are seeing them for who they really are. A manipulative drama queen in terms of Meghan and a spoilt crybaby in terms of Harry. And I think that's why even the progressives are losing faith or interest in them, and you're seeing them become an international laughingstock, not just on South Park. We've seen an increasing number of nighttime talk shows, particularly Jimmy Kimmel in America making fun of them, but also their friend James Corden too. It's open season on them, and I don't think there could be any worse reaction for a self-important couple than to realize that they've become international objects of ridicule. I mean, how do you come back from that? How do you come back from having the world discuss your frozen Todger?
Well, this is the thing. They desperately want to be taken seriously. They don't seem to be able to laugh at themselves. At least Harry doesn't seem to have done that for a long time now, and I don't think I've seen Meghan laugh at herself either, apart from when she was mocking the royal family, of course. But we shall see. It does seem like America has fallen out of love, if they ever were in love, with the couple. But I hope this marks a change in the way that we view this kind of endless grandstanding and wokery by some people that consider themselves victims when they are no such thing, in my humble opinion. Thank you very much indeed, Rafe, for joining us this afternoon to discuss that South Park episode of Harry and Meghan. That's Rafe Haydel-Mancu, one of our favourite royal broadcasters and commentators here at GB News. You are with GB News on TV and DAB radio. After the break, we're going to be talking British Gas. That's because British Gas owners' annual profits tripled to a record £3.3 billion after a price surge triggered by Russia's halt on gas supplies to Europe. I want to ask, people are sick and tired of seeing these big profits, aren't they? So should we just go the whole hog and nationalise the lot? Let me know what you think. But first, let's get a check on the news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
It is 3:32. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has urged world leaders to send the most advanced weapons to Ukraine and to double down on military support. Addressing the Munich Security Conference, Rishi Sunak said the West's response to Russian aggression has not been strong enough. He confirmed the UK will be the first country to send longer-range weapons to Ukraine and urged allies to provide advanced NATO-standard capabilities to counter the Kremlin's attack.
What's at stake in this war is even greater than the security and sovereignty of one nation. It's about the security and sovereignty of every nation. Because Russia's invasion, its abhorrent war crimes and irresponsible nuclear rhetoric are symptomatic of a broader threat to everything we believe in.
The Minister also confirmed Britain and the EU have an understanding on how to solve problems with the Northern Ireland Protocol, but no deal has been done. Rishi Sunak met the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at the summit and also held talks with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. He described it as a positive discussion, the leaders saying intense work was still needed at official and ministerial levels, and they remain in close contact over the coming days. The body of former Premier League footballer Christian Atsu has been recovered in Turkey. His agent confirmed the Ghanaian international, who had spells at Newcastle, Chelsea and Everton, was found almost 2 weeks after the earthquakes. More than 45,000 people have died in Turkey and Syria. This morning, though, a child was amongst 3 people to be rescued 296 hours after the first quake struck. And British billionaire Sir Jim Ratcliffe and his company Ineos have joined the race to buy Manchester United. The chairman of one of Qatar's biggest banks, Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani, has also tabled a bid. Sir Jim says he wants to make the club a beacon for a modern, progressive, fan-centred approach to ownership, which is focused on winning the Champions League. That's it for the moment. TV online and DAB Plus Radio. This is GB News, but don't go anywhere. Real Britain will be back in just a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So people have been absolutely furious this week. There's been public outrage, media outrage, outrage from our politicians, some of them anyway, all because British gas owner Centrica reported soaring underlying annual profits of 2.8 billion, up from 392 million in 2021. But despite thousands of households struggling with gas and electric bills, some people are very upset that Centrica's boss, Chris O'Shea, is so far refusing to reveal whether he will waive his bonus or not. People think that he should because people are suffering with their bills. Perhaps that's fair enough. But there are more energy firms which have seen record profits since oil and gas prices jumped following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There are those who would argue that all natural monopolies, like gas, water, electricity, other things I'm sure, should be in public ownership, and we should nationalise energy with the fact Centrica has posted these record profits, and that strengthens that argument. So I want to ask, get down to basics, people are furious. Should we just simply nationalise British energy? Then we don't need to worry about people making humongous profits. So joining me to discuss this is energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Andy Mayer. We've also got leader of the SDP, William Clouston, and Socialist Party industrial organiser, Rob Williams. Thank you very much indeed. We've got a sweeping range of opinions on this panel. This is brilliant. Andy, I think you'll give a strong argument for why we shouldn't. Should we start with you?
Yeah, well, we've had a brilliant example this week of what the alternative looks like. We've got EDF Group in France, which owns a British subsidiary which runs nuclear power plants. And they've made a €5 billion loss or thereabouts. And what's going to happen with that is that the French taxpayer will be expected to cover the failure of the French nuclear industry. Any investment they want to put into that industry in order to build new plants will again have to come from the taxpayer. Well, it'll be competing with other priorities such as defence, health, education, and maybe energy won't be the priority and they won't have enough investment. So there may be issues people have with companies making headline profits when times are good. They don't seem to notice when it's bad. But the result of that is you end up with competition driving innovation. And if you go to nationalisation, you end up with the government making decisions for political reasons, and those reasons are often poorly made.
William, Andy's said there that France is having its issues with its energy company. Do you think Britain would just do it better?
It depends what you've got to ask a fundamental question. What is the purpose of energies and utility policy? And we think in the SDP that the purpose is to provide secure and reliable energy to the public and water to the public. That's the purpose of it. Trouble is, we've been governed by people for about 30 years, 40 years even, who think the purpose is to set up a structure that enables people to extract profits out of it. And basically this is what we have. You have a crazy situation where the energy market, is blown up because of the war. Yes, I accept Centrica are making what essentially are war profits, and there's a good case for taking some of those back. But I'm just looking at the structure. It's not socially useful to have what we have. I've never understood why you need 80 separate companies taking a bet on the wholesale energy price and laying that bet off onto households. And as the previous speaker from the IEA said, when things get into trouble, you've got to remember who bails it out. Look at Bulb. The state, which is basically you and I, Emily, had to bail this structure out.
Well, Rob, let's bring you in. You are a socialist, self-proclaimed socialist. So may I ask you, just quickly, is there anything you wouldn't wish to nationalise?
I think the big issue is that the big economic levers in the economy should be taken into public ownership. That's what we're talking about. I think a majority of Tory voters want the energy and utility companies renationalised. The game's up, isn't it, for these people? They've had decades of racking up the profits. I mean, it's a bit rich to mention the nuclear power industry in France. What we have here is a disaster in Hinkley Point, an absolute private sector catastrophe bailed out by the state already. So the point is that the resources are there in society, but they're in the hands of the fat cats. We shouldn't forget, by the way, British Gas fired and rehired its workforce a couple of years ago, took £10,000 out of their pockets, sacked hundreds of workers. We can't rely on the fat cats. They'll run everything in the interest of profit and everyone else will suffer.
Well, politicians could run everything in the interest of politicians, some might argue. But Andy, do you have any problem with these very high profits that these companies are making while prices for consumers are going up? Do you think that, for example, the boss of British Gas should feel a bit shy, a bit sheepish about the fact that he could be raking in a massive bonus at this time?
Well, I think he's got to be feeling that he's being blown in all directions. He waived his bonus a couple of years ago when there were record low prices, and now he's being asked to do the same thing again despite having a record performance. Now, at some point, these companies do actually have to attract talent, and attracting talent at the top end of the city does mean attracting high bonuses. So I don't have a specific problem with him doing that, but he's looking at it from the point of view of PR, and he'll make a decision, I assume, in the next month or two. Going back to the previous point, absolutely correct that Hinkley Point is a disaster, but what's happened there is the worst of both worlds. You've had the privatisation of profit and the nationalisation of risk, and you can't do that. You've got to say to these companies, if you don't succeed, if you don't hit your targets, you're going to lose all your money and you get fired. And that's the fundamental problem with nationalisation. If they all fail, they don't lose their jobs. They stick around, like the CEO of Bulb has done since his company failed last year and the government took it over.
Well, William, would you like to come back on that one?
Can I just make that point? That's ludicrous. What's happened?
Rob, I'll come to you next. I'll just let William come in there.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I've come back on. Yeah, I mean, on projects like Hinkley Point. I mean, I just ask people to think a little bit more deeply on this. The state used to build civil nuclear power stations in this country, and the Tories decided that we would stop doing that. Effectively closed down British nuclear fuels in 2010, and they stopped doing so because they didn't want to do it. And that's the problem. It's a lack of will on the part of the people that govern us to actually get energy strategy right. And it can't be that the Tories don't believe that the state can do these things. Why? Because it thinks the French state can do it, or the Chinese Communist Party can do it effectively. Because as soon as they closed down the capacity in British nuclear power, the Tories went, crawling to the Chinese and the French to say, can you do it for us? It's exactly the same in railways. Railways should be nationalised. We can run them. You can have a superb national integrated system from Caithness to Cornwall if you wanted it, but instead they chopped it up into little bits. It's completely phony. And other states, meanwhile, are running our railways. It's a disgrace, and it's very, very unpatriotic.
Well, I'll get Andy's view on that first. But Rob, do you think there's any role for private companies? Surely we need private investment if we're going to transition to a brighter, greener future. The government isn't going to necessarily pick the right winners when it comes to whether we're going to be using hydrogen or whether we're going to be using electric vehicles or whatnot. Don't we need private companies to innovate, Rob?
Well, look, this government won't do it, is it? Because this government is totally subservient, and probably Starmer is the same, subservient to the private sector. So no, I mean, what the guy from the IEA just said is very interesting, because that's what happens all the time. Under this system, under capitalism, then what happens is when the private sector can't deliver, then we always nationalise the risk. Look what happened when the banks failed. They were nationalised, they were taken into public ownership temporarily, and then when we put them back on their feet, what happened? They were taken back into the private sector, making billions of pounds of profit. So the question is here, is that no, to run a proper economy that safeguards the interests of the majority, then I don't apologise for this, I'm a socialist. And yes, we should have socialist public ownership for the majority of the economy, the economic levers of the economy, because tell you what, you look at what you have now, it's an absolute catastrophe.
Andy, you must feel like you're pushing water uphill on this one. It does seem like the public outrage is, well, massive. And from all sides of the political spectrum, I think there is a growing feeling that perhaps energy and water and whatnot should be renationalised.
Well, it won't solve anything. I mean, again, I do agree with the previous speaker. We should not have bailed the banks out. We should have let the bondholders of those banks lose their money while protecting the account holders, so vulnerable people didn't suffer consequences of basically crooked bankers making bad decisions. But on the energy front, again, if we look at nuclear power, the reason we don't have a British nuclear industry is because we're really bad at it. We tried that in the 1950s, 60s and 70s and designed something that nobody else wanted to buy. We then looked at the French and said, we'll have some of that. They're much better at it. But it looks like the French's new model is failing as well. So all of these state-owned corporations have delivered bad products. And that's the fundamental problem with nationalisation, is you don't actually solve anything. You just take everything into the government and you disguise the problems until they become very, very serious, as they have done in the nuclear industry time and time again.
William, just very quickly, because we have to wrap things up, unfortunately. But I think the profit motive is a wonderful thing. It gets people working, it gets people innovating, it gets people trading, etc., etc. Do you think we risk actually making things worse, perhaps, if we demonise people who are making a profit?
I think for the ordinary products that we consume day by day, the private sector is very, very efficient at producing those and should be left to get on with it. But on things like energy and water and railways and housing, the state does have a role. And my complaint is that that role has been deliberately denuded and the results are disastrous. I mean, you know, we need to wake up, because the European Union and China and the United States are aggressively pursuing a policy of energy resilience and energy self-sufficiency, and we've got to wake up.
Well, there you go. Thank you very much indeed, all three of you. That was a robust debate, perhaps a little one-sided, but that's no worry. We like to have all different views represented. That was energy analyst at the IEA, Andy Mayer. We also had leader of the SDP, William Clouston, and Socialist Party industrial organiser, Rob Williams there. I don't think it's a good idea to renationalise the energy companies, just putting that out there. But please do let me know what you think. Now, this week, Gloria Di Piero has sat down with Dave Penman, General Secretary of the First Division Association. He is the leader of the Civil Service Trade Union. He was asked about the bullying allegations against the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab.
Talking about, at this point in time, we think more than 24 civil servants have come forward, 8 separate complaints, 3 different government departments over a period of 4 years. So all of that has to be investigated. That doesn't mean he's guilty, but it suggests there's something quite substantial here around his conduct that so many civil servants, and it's not easy to complain about a government minister, so many civil servants have come forward over such a long period of time with complaints.
You can watch the full interview on GB News show Gloria Meets, where you'll find out who the person behind the politician is every Sunday at 6 p.m, so stay tuned for that. Now, lots of you have been sending in your thoughts on the topics we have been discussing today. On the small boats crisis, Sue said, quick question, why are these migrants spending thousands of pounds to reach our shores when they could fly in at less cost? And why also are they disposing of their IDs before landing if they are genuine asylum seekers? Well, it doesn't take Hercule Poirot to work out that perhaps they don't want the security services over here to know where they are coming from. Tony says, if the government doesn't take drastic action to actually stop the boats, Rishi will be out at the next election. If they can stop it, Rishi will have a Thatcher Falkland resurgence. There you go. And on Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, Morrow says, independence is dead in the water, as are the SNP. For Sturgeon to say that it was time to go because Scottish politics had become too polarising is just wrong. She knew that her gender recognition reform bill had sunk her. She is the worst thing to happen to Scotland, and for her supporters to say that she did a lot of good for Scotland is just delusional. She has not done one thing that was good for Scotland. She is a disgrace. I love how to the point our viewers are always. It's common sense, straight to the point, what I like to see. And Linda says, I'm Scottish, and it's all down to unionist supporters that independence has been held back. Labour and the Tories have done nothing, allowing this country to go to ruin in preparation for rejoining the European Union. Well, there you go, strong stuff. Thank you for sending in your views this afternoon. Now, we've got a bit of a funny one to end the show, but it's a classic of the university wokery genre. The University of Kent has been criticised for discouraging use of the phrase Christian name, claiming it is offensive to non-Christians. The university told students to stop using the term because it claims it only relates to Christians, instead suggesting students say first name or given name. And if that wasn't enough woke for you, the students at the University of Oxford have been warned of potentially upsetting themes in a range of medieval works, stating some works may contain racist and misogynist views. Right, now with me in the studios, host of Reasoned UK, Jess Gill, who joins me now. Now, Jess, you are fantastic in the way you highlight how people are a little bit confused when it comes to wokery. They think that they are saying the right thing, don't they? And they can't really back it up with why. Tell me a little bit about the channel, because I know you've been doing some great sort of vox pops before we get onto the story, of course.
I mean, Reasoned UK is absolutely fantastic. It's to show that not all young people are woke. I think the strong majority of young people don't believe that there's a million genders and all that nonsense. And I think it gives young people a voice. So what I've been doing recently, and Liam and Darren have been doing, is we've been going in the street asking people basic questions, like something as simple as, are men important? That shouldn't stun people up, but it does. Like, they can't answer, are men important?
So people are scared to actually say, yes, I do think my father, brother, husband is actually important.
It's men who are saying it as well. Like, imagine being so pathetic, pretty much, that they can't even say that they're important.
Wow. That's not a great state of affairs, is it, for a country and a society? But hopefully you will shine a light on it and that will change. But what do you make of, well, firstly, this story of the University of Kent saying that Christian name is now beyond the pale?
Let's be real, it's not really about Christian names. No one's offended by that. It's against Western society, it's against Western civilization. I think all this is rooted. Another example of it was they're against surname because it has patriarchal roots. I think if it has patriarchal roots, I think we need to encourage people to, you know, adopt fatherhood. There are too many single-parent homes which aren't fair on women, aren't fair on children, and I think men need to take responsibility, as I was saying before. I think that's a massive issue. I think Western civilization and Christianity have made some of the most amazing things in the world.
But it's almost taboo to even say that. It's quite remarkable how young people, and obviously not you, and the people that you work with and whatnot, they obviously take a different view, but it does seem like young people now are taught to be ashamed of where they come from and of their history. But also with this Oxford University, so they've now got trigger warnings on a series of medieval works, including those of Geoffrey Chaucer, who of course died in the year 1400. I mean, it is quite remarkable that we're putting trigger warnings on texts that old.
I mean, these are grown people, they're students. I think they can handle this sort of thing.
You would have thought.
At the same time as well, we're allowing kids to go through harmful surgery, saying that they're able to change their gender. They're fine with that, but they can't handle some sensitive, vaguely sensitive topics. It's absolutely ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. Perhaps they're trying to protect themselves from, I don't know, lawsuits or something. We had a trigger warning, don't blame us. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us. That was host of Reasoned UK, Jess Gill. Thank you very very much indeed. Now, on the topic of the Christian name discussion, a spokesperson from the University of Kent has said, "We are committed to the creation and support of an inclusive and diverse community. As part of this, we provide informal guidance for those who would like support in how to communicate in ways that make others feel welcome." It's like someone asked the chatbot to write this. Anyway, these are not formal policies and are not enforced. They are intended as a point of reference to help staff and students feel confident in playing their part in creating an inclusive university community. And on the topic of trigger warnings, I must read another. A spokesperson for Oxford University has stated the institution does not recommend or encourage the use of content warnings. And it goes on. So you've been... Now, that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much, Jess, for joining me in the studio. You've been watching Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. Thank you very much for sending in all your views this afternoon. Thank you very much for your company. This show is on every Saturday at 2 p.m. But for now, I'll leave you with the weather.
Hello, I'm Craig Snell, and here's your latest forecast from the Met Office. Well, as we go through the next few days, it's set to remain changeable across the north of the UK, but further south it's going to be fairly mild, but for most of us it's going to be turning a good deal colder come the middle of next week. So here's the situation at the moment. We've got an area of low pressure across the north, bringing in a spell of rain here. Still some lingering rain across the English Channel, but as the evening goes on, we will see that begin to clear away into the continent. The rain across Scotland and northern England also moving away as we go into the small hours of Sunday, but that will briefly allow something a bit clearer and colder for Scotland, so risk of some icy stretches here. Cooler elsewhere compared to recent nights, but still on the mild side. Temperatures for most towns and cities not falling much lower than 7 or 8 degrees. So a quiet start in the south on Sunday, but rain already working its way into western Scotland, and that will move its way eastwards as the morning goes on. Bringing in a lot of cloud also for Northern Ireland and Northern England. Could just see a few spits and spots of rain here too, especially across the high ground. But further south, here's where we see the lion's share of the sunshine, especially come the afternoon across southwestern England, central southern England, and temperatures here reaching 14 or 15 degrees. A milder day tomorrow compared to today across Scotland, but that'll be tempered somewhat by a keen wind which will reach gale force later on in the evening as this rain continues to work its way southeastwards as the night goes on. Further south, fairly quiet, but a bit more wind around, but that will help keep temperatures up around 7 or 8 degrees. So Monday we will see a bit of a north-south split across the country. This area of rain will slowly work its way a little bit further southwards, so quite a breezy, wet picture for much of Scotland, Northern Ireland and eventually into Northern England. But further south, remaining dry, some brighter spells and still mild here. And that continues on into Tuesday, but then a change on Wednesday. All of us turning colder with a risk of some wintry showers in the north.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.